The price of loyalty. A silent auction, a silent heart. The grand auction hall was filled with America's wealthiest elite, business tycoons, politicians, and socialites, all dressed in designer suits and elegant gowns. The room was illuminated by a massive golden chandelier, its crystals reflecting off champagne glasses as quiet conversations and laughter echoed through the air. But in the center of the sandy auction arena, amidst all the luxury and extravagance, lay a German shepherd, alone, motionless, and defeated. His name was Max. Once a highly trained K-9 officer, Max had once served in dangerous operations, tracking criminals, detecting explosives, and even saving lives. But after a serious injury on duty, he had been deemed unfit for service. And just like that, he had become an item to be auctioned off. The auctioneer, an older man with silver-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat and adjusted his bow tie. Lot 42. Presenting Max, a highly trained police dog. Exceptional intelligence, loyalty, and strength. He glanced at the audience, flashing a well-practiced smile. Opening bid, $115,000. Silence. The room, once filled with whispers and excitement, suddenly grew still. People exchanged glances, a few chuckled under their breath. A woman in a red dress leaned toward her husband and muttered, "Who would want a broken police dog?" A man in a navy suit scoffed, swirling his drink. "Probably can't even run anymore. Not worth the trouble." Max didn't move. He had heard these voices before. He had learned to expect rejection. The auctioneer, now visibly uncomfortable, cleared his throat again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this dog has saved lives. Do I hear a bid?" More silence. A few guests sighed impatiently, shifting in their seats. Then, from the back of the room, a voice rang out. $500. A laughter-filled room, a heartbreaking moment. Heads turned. A ripple of confusion and amusement spread through the hall. A young man stood near the entrance, completely out of place among the crowd of millionaires. He wasn't wearing a suit or a designer watch. Instead, he had on a worn-out denim jacket, scuffed boots, and calloused hands that told a story of hard work, not inherited wealth. His name was Liam Carter. The room erupted in laughter. "Is this a joke?" Someone sneered. 500. "Kid, you lost. This isn't a flea market." Even the auctioneer hesitated. He glanced around the room, waiting for a real bid. But none came. With a resigned sigh, he slammed the gavel down. "Sold for $500. More laughter. People shook their heads, amused by the absurdity of it all. But Liam didn't care. He ignored them all, walking toward the center of the arena. And for the first time that night, Max lifted his head. Their eyes met. And in that moment, something changed. For months, Max had been abandoned, unwanted, discarded, forgotten. But this young man, this stranger, wasn't looking at him with pity. He was looking at him like he mattered. A new beginning. The cold night air bit at Liam's face as he stepped out of the auction hall. Behind him, the laughter and whispers still echoed, but he pushed them aside. None of that mattered now. Max walked beside him, his movements slow and cautious. He had been trained to obey, but there was hesitation in his steps, a wariness, a deep wound beyond the one on his body. As they reached Liam's old, rusty pickup truck, he opened the passenger door. "Come on, buddy." Max hesitated. For a moment, Liam thought he wouldn't move, that he would stand there forever, too afraid to trust again. Then, slowly, Max climbed in. As Liam started the engine, he glanced at the dog beside him. There was something in Max's eyes, something haunted. For a brief second, he wondered if he had made a mistake, a memory buried in blood. 2 years earlier, the night was dark and wet from the rain, illuminated only by flashing red and blue lights. Sirens screamed through the city. Max was on duty. His handler gripped the leash tightly as they chased down a dangerous fugitive, an armed suspect who had killed 2 officers the week before. It was supposed to be a routine takedown. It wasn't. Gunfire erupted from the alleyway. Max lunged forward, his teeth locking onto the suspect's arm. Then, a sharp, searing pain. A bullet tore through his side, knocking him off his feet. His vision blurred. The handler's voice faded into chaos. He tried to get up, tried to keep fighting, but his body wouldn't respond. The last thing he remembered was the suspect breaking free and running. Then, darkness. Back in the present, Liam noticed Max shifting uneasily in the passenger seat, his body tense. Liam swallowed. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" he murmured. Max didn't respond, but he didn't have to. Liam understood, because he had been there too. The weight of the past. The drive home was silent. Liam's house was nothing like the mansions of the people at the auction. It was small, tucked away in the countryside, surrounded by open fields and thick forests. It wasn't lavish, but it was home. As they pulled into the driveway, Liam shut off the engine and looked over at Max. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said softly. Max didn't move. For a long moment, he simply stared at Liam. Then, as if making a decision, he slowly rested his head against Liam's leg. Liam's chest tightened. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was something. A start. And for now, that was enough. Earning trust, one step at a time. A house that was never a home. Liam pulled the truck into the driveway, the headlights illuminating the small, worn-down house that stood against the backdrop of the darkened countryside. The wind rustled the trees around them, whispering through the fields, as if welcoming them home. But Liam wasn't sure if this place had ever truly been home. Not for him, not for anyone. He had lived here alone for the past 4 years, ever since his father had passed away. The house had been his father's dream, built with his own hands, but to Liam, it had always been just another place to survive. And now, he wasn't alone anymore. He glanced at Max, still curled up on the passenger seat, stiff and unmoving. For a moment, Liam hesitated. Would Max even want to be here? Would he even let himself feel safe? There was only one way to find out. A step toward trust. Liam climbed out of the truck and walked to the other side, pulling open the door. Max didn't move. His deep brown eyes flickered to Liam's, guarded and uncertain. Liam crouched beside him, keeping his voice soft, calm. "Come on, buddy. Let's get inside." Max's ears twitched. His muscles tensed, his paws shifting slightly, as if he was debating whether to listen or to run. Liam didn't reach for him. He didn't pull or force him. Instead, he did something most people wouldn't. He waited. Seconds passed. Then a minute. Then, very slowly, Max lifted his head, sniffing the air. With a cautious movement, he stretched his front legs forward and hopped down from the truck, landing softly on the dirt driveway. Liam let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It was a start. The first night in a new life. Inside, the house was simple but warm. A small fireplace crackled in the corner, the scent of old wood filling the air. Liam had never been much of a decorator. His father had built the house to be practical, not fancy, and Liam had kept it that way. Just a worn-out couch, a wooden coffee table, and a kitchen that had seen better days. He led Max inside and knelt down. "All right, let's check that wound of yours." Max stiffened, his tail lowering, his ears pinned back. Liam sighed. This dog had learned not to trust humans, and he had every reason not to. Liam knew that feeling well. He had learned the same lesson. Instead of pushing, he got up and walked to the kitchen, grabbing a bowl of water and some leftover steak from dinner. He placed it in front of Max and stepped back. At first, Max didn't move. Then, cautiously, he leaned forward and sniffed the food. For a second, he glanced up at Liam, as if asking, "Is this real? Are you really giving this to me?" Liam gave a small nod. And then Max ate. As the minutes passed, Liam sat on the couch, watching Max from a distance. "It's gonna take time, isn't it?" he muttered. Max didn't answer, of course. But Liam already knew. A man with his own wounds. As Max finished his meal, Liam leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't told anyone why he had come to that auction. Not even himself. But deep down, he knew. Because Max wasn't the only one who had been abandoned. 4 years ago, when his father passed away, Liam had been left completely alone. He had no siblings, no mother in the picture, no extended family that cared. His father had been a strict, hard-working man, raising Liam with discipline and silence rather than warmth. Liam had spent his childhood trying to earn his approval, working harder, learning faster, trying to be the kind of son his father would be proud of. But it had never been enough. And when his father died, Liam realized that he had spent his whole life trying to prove something to a man who was no longer there to see it. The years that followed had been lonely, bitter, and maybe that's why, when he saw Max sitting alone in that auction hall, he had felt something he hadn't felt in years. A connection. A test of trust. The night passed slowly. Liam slept lightly on the couch, keeping one eye open, listening for any movement from Max. But the dog didn't move from his spot. He lay curled up in the corner of the room, his ears twitching at every sound, his body still tense, as if ready to run at any moment. It wasn't until just before dawn that Liam woke up to a soft noise. A whimper. Liam blinked, pushing himself up on his elbows. Max was dreaming. His paws twitched slightly, his nose wrinkling, his breaths coming out shaky, uneven. And then, a low, heart-wrenching whimper. Liam's chest tightened. He knew that sound. It was the sound of someone reliving something they couldn't escape. Without thinking, he reached out, placing a gentle hand on Max's side. Instantly, Max's eyes shot open, his body jerking up, his ears flat against his head. Liam didn't move. He didn't pull back. He just let his hand rest there, unmoving, steady. Max's breathing was ragged, his body still trembling. But after a long moment, something changed. The tension eased. And then, Max lowered his head back down. Liam swallowed, feeling something in his chest shift. "You're not alone anymore, buddy," he whispered. Max didn't respond. But this time, he didn't move away either. One step closer. The sun rose slowly, casting golden light through the windows. And as Liam sat there, watching Max finally close his eyes without fear, he realized something. This wasn't just about saving Max. This was about saving each other. And maybe, just maybe, they had both found exactly what they needed, breaking the chains of the past. A new dawn, a new beginning. The first rays of the morning sun filtered through the old wooden blinds of Liam's house, casting golden streaks across the floor. A soft breeze carried the scent of damp earth through the open window, a reminder that rain had passed overnight. Liam stretched, rubbing his tired eyes as he sat up from the couch. He had spent the entire night in the living room, keeping watch over Max, the dog who had gone from a police hero to an unwanted relic at an auction. His gaze drifted to the corner of the room, where Max lay. For the first time, the dog was sleeping soundly. Not curled up in a tight ball, not flinching at every sound. But stretched out, his legs relaxed, his breathing slow and deep. Liam exhaled, a small, almost relieved smile tugging at his lips. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was something. Breakfast and a silent understanding. Liam got up quietly, making his way to the kitchen. He didn't want to wake Max, not after the restless night they had both endured. As he rummaged through the fridge, he pulled out some eggs and toast for himself and grabbed a pack of dog food he had picked up the night before. He filled a bowl with clean water and poured the food into another dish. Then he set both down a few feet away from Max and waited. The dog's ears twitched. His nose twitched next. Then, slowly, Max's eyes blinked open. He raised his head, his gaze immediately locking onto Liam. The tension returned. His muscles stiffened, his paws digging slightly into the wooden floor as if he were ready to flee at any moment. Liam didn't move. Instead, he simply nodded toward the food. "It's yours, buddy. No strings attached." Max hesitated. For a long moment, he simply stared at the bowl. Then, cautiously, he stood up and took a step forward. Then another. And finally, he lowered his head and began to eat. Liam let out a slow breath. It was a simple act, eating a meal, but for a dog who had been discarded, wounded, and tossed aside like he was nothing, it was more than that. It was the first step toward healing. A walk down memory lane. After breakfast, Liam grabbed his old leather jacket and his truck keys. He turned to Max, who was sitting near the door, watching him with cautious eyes. "Wanna go for a ride?" Liam asked. Max tilted his head slightly, not in confusion, but curiosity. Liam took that as a yes. A few minutes later, they were in the truck, driving down an empty dirt road that led toward the outskirts of town. Liam didn't say much, and neither did Max. But they didn't have to. There was something comfortable about the silence. They stopped near an open field, where an old abandoned training ground still stood. Liam cut the engine and stepped out. Max followed, hesitantly at first, but as soon as his paws touched the grass, something in him seemed to change. His ears lifted. His tail gave the smallest wag. And for the first time, Liam saw something in Max's eyes that hadn't been there before. Familiarity. This place. He remembered it. The ghosts of a past life. Liam walked ahead, keeping a relaxed pace, letting Max take in his surroundings. The field was overgrown with wildflowers and tall grass, but in the distance, remnants of an old K9 training course still stood, weathered wooden platforms, rusted tunnels, and an obstacle wall that had seen better days. Max stopped, staring at it. His ears twitched, his body going rigid. Liam watched as the dog's muscles tensed, his breathing slightly quicker now. Then, as if caught in a memory that wasn't his choice to relive, Max suddenly bolted forward. Not running away, but toward the training course. He leaped over a fallen log without hesitation. He weaved through the rusted poles as if they were still part of an active training drill. And when he reached the old wooden ramp, he stopped. His paws dug into the dirt. His head lowered. His entire body trembled. Liam felt his chest tighten. This was where it happened, wasn't it? Where Max had once trained. Where he had once been unstoppable, powerful, trusted. And where in a split second, everything had been taken away from him. The scar that couldn't be seen. Liam walked forward carefully. "You used to be the best, huh?" he murmured. Max didn't move. Liam crouched beside him, his fingers lightly brushing over the faint scar on Max's side, where the bullet had once torn through his body, leaving behind a wound that no one had cared to properly heal. Max flinched, but he didn't pull away. That, more than anything, told Liam everything he needed to know. Max wasn't afraid of the physical pain. He was afraid of what came after, of being seen as worthless. Liam sighed, resting his hand on Max's back. "They were wrong about you, you know," he said. Max's ears flicked slightly. Liam smiled. "You're not broken. You never were." For a long moment, they just sat there, man and dog, both carrying the weight of past wounds. And in that moment, something shifted. Not a grand, dramatic change. Just something small, something quiet. Max turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Liam's. And for the first time, they weren't filled with hesitation. They were filled with trust. A promise without words. By the time they returned home, the sky had turned a soft shade of orange, the sun dipping below the horizon. Max walked into the house without hesitation this time. He didn't curl up in a corner. He didn't flinch when Liam moved. Instead, he walked over to the couch, jumped up, and stretched out, completely relaxed. Liam chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, so now you think you own the place?" Max just let out a deep, satisfied sigh. Liam grabbed a blanket, tossing it over the couch before settling in beside him. As the fire flickered in the dimly lit room, Max turned his head slightly, his tail thumping once against the cushion. It was small, but Liam noticed it, because trust wasn't built in a day. It was earned, piece by piece, and as Max finally closed his eyes without fear, Liam knew this wasn't just a second chance for the dog. It was a second chance for him too. The heart of a warrior. A test of true strength. Days turned into weeks, and Liam watched as Max slowly became himself again. The once wounded, hesitant dog who had cowered in the corner of his home was now walking with confidence, his tail wagging more freely, his trust growing stronger. But Liam knew, trust is never truly tested until it faces a challenge. And that challenge came one cold evening when Liam stopped by a small roadside store to pick up supplies. Max sat patiently in the truck, watching through the windshield, his ears alert as Liam stepped inside. It was supposed to be a quick stop, but fate had other plans. A moment of instinct. Inside the store, Liam was checking out at the counter when the chime of the doorbell rang. A man in a dark hoodie stepped inside, moving quickly, his hands shaking slightly. Something about him felt off. Liam's instincts, sharpened from years of living on his own, kicked in immediately. He watched as the man hesitated near the register, eyes darting between the cashier and the door. Then, a flash of metal. A gun. Liam's stomach tightened. "Empty the register, now," the man hissed. The cashier, a young woman barely out of high school, froze in fear. The store fell into a tense silence. Outside, in the truck, Max's ears perked up. His body tensed, his instincts firing off like a trigger. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. A decision that changed everything. Liam's hands curled into fists. He wasn't a cop. He wasn't a hero.